Thanks very much, Rose, and thank you all for being here. What a great turnout for a pretty rough day today, so thank you all for coming. Back in 1997, Rose mentioned I did some international travel for work, and in 1997, I was fortunate to have a 3-week trip to Asia and Australia and New Zealand. And I never got out of the Sydney city limits, and so I knew there was a lot more to Australia I wanted to see, and did get to 2 or 3 cities in New Zealand, but I knew that was a place that we had to go. And during COVID, back about 3 years ago, I think, there was a Zoom program that a couple gave about Australia and New Zealand, and we watched the Zoom program, and by the time it was over, we had decided we were booking a trip, and that afternoon we booked a trip. It got canceled once because of COVID, but this is the result of that. So it was an NBA trip that motivated us to take our trip. So we did this trip in March of last year. And let's see if I can do that. There we go. And it's not the easiest place to get to, as you can imagine. So we drove to Detroit Airport. Got there in plenty of time for that. Flew to Dallas, had a 5 3/4 hour layover there. Followed that with a 17-hour flight to Sydney. Had a 2-hour layover there. And then a 3-hour flight to Cairns. So all in all, the trip was about 34 3/4 hours. Just to give you an idea of where we were, we weren't able to go through the whole country, but did hit some of the key points that we wanted to see. So, as I mentioned, we flew into Sydney, flew up to Cairns, ended up, at that time, I don't know if it's still going on, but Australia was having a lot of trouble as a result of COVID, staffing up their airlines entirely. So all the airlines have discontinued flights from Cairns to Alice Springs. So our next stop after Cairns was supposed to be directly Alice Springs, but we actually had to fly back to Sydney and then to Alice Springs. So basically it cost us a day of our trip, and a day that we would have been in Sydney for us because we had to travel. And then from Alice Springs we went to Uluru, and then back to Sydney, and on to New Zealand. So that gives you a feel for what part of the country we're at. Just for comparison's sake, Australia is a big country. You know, it's basically as big as the United States. So we started out in Sydney. So basically it was like being in northern Florida. Walked to Cairns, and it's like the northern tip of lower peninsula of Michigan. And Alice Springs is like being out in southwest Nebraska, out in the middle of nowhere. And then Uluru is kind of out there in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. So it's a big expanse. So there was a lot of travel involved once we got there. And all in all, on our trip, we had 11 different flights. Well, we got to Cairns, beautiful day, and we had a hotel very close to the ocean, as you can see. This is our hotel. This is taken from our hotel room. There's a hotel across the street, and this is a cruise ship. So that's how close to the water we were. Rose mentioned I'm a birder, so of course I wanted to see as many life birds as I could within the constraints of being in a tour group that wasn't geared to birding. But so we got together with a group of people on our trip and went out for a little walk from the hotel, and within 10 minutes I had 2 life birds. So I was pretty excited. Willie Wagtail. Yeah, they have some pretty cool names over there. So, Willie Wagtail and a red-tailed black cockatoo. And that one took me by surprise. There was about a dozen of them kind of foraging in the grass under some trees. And from a distance, I just thought they were pigeons. And I got a little closer look. I was like, wow, cockatoos.
Looks like a fan.
The week or 2 before we went, there were significant rains in the Cannes area, and we were really concerned about whether we were even going to be able to go to that part of the country or not. And we were actually scheduled for a train ride out into the rainforest there, and the track was partially washed out, so we couldn't do the train ride. So our tour director rallied to the event and scheduled us to go to the rainforest station just outside of Cannes. And that ended up being a great day. We really enjoyed that. So it was kind of a multifaceted day. You can see Paul made a friend there right away. But there was a zoo portion of what they call animal parks there. And of course they had all the typical Australian animals like dingoes and Tasmanian devils and the most relaxed koala I've ever seen in my life. This guy was just hanging out. I think it was the first one I'd ever seen that was awake, let alone doing something. And another facet of this place was they had these ducks. And we had seen ducks in a lot of cities, like in Boston and different places, but we'd never actually ridden on one. So we got to ride this one on kind of a river that was still somewhat flooded from the rains the week before and through the tropical rainforest that you see there. So it was a pretty cool ride. And another aspect of it was they have a number of the members of the Aboriginal community that work for them and give you some cultural experiences while you're there. So this gentleman talked to us a little bit about tribal life. And this gentleman was demonstrating a woomera, which is a spear thrower. And they can he showed us throwing a spear just normally and then using this device. And it was really impressive. He could throw it 3 times as far, 3 times as fast, and he was incredibly accurate with it. And then he demonstrated boomerangs, and all of us got to try boomerangs. So here's Paula showing her form throwing the boomerang. And most of us, this will be the only picture that they would not see the result. We didn't. I think there was one person in our group that actually had enough of a throw that it curved some. Most of us were throwing kind of right in the ground. And then they had music and dancing demonstrations. So this is a didgeridoo. Hopefully this works.
Getting feedback.
Then you get together with a buddy who has clap sticks and you can play duets. And these guys get together with a bunch of their friends and perform a dance. That was quite an experience. So it was a great first day, and we weren't too disappointed that we didn't get to do the train ride. I think that ended up being a much better day. The second day of after we got to Cannes, was completely different. We went from tropical rainforest out to the Great Barrier Reef. So we took a 21-mile ride on the catamaran there out to the reef. Our Davo, our naturalist that was on board, gave a presentation ride out and the ride back, talking to us about the reef and some of the denizens of the reef and some of the things that are impacting it. And our destination that we're going to is a place called Michaelmas Key. And And you can just barely see it, this little spit of sand right there. This Michaelmas Key. It's 294 yards long, 55 yards wide, for a total of about 4.5 acres. And during the peak of nesting season, there are 20,000 birds on that. We were a little late in the season, so we didn't see 20,000, but we saw several thousand for sure. Well, after we got out there, first thing was to take a ride on a glass bottom boat right over the reef. And so we didn't see much in the way of fish life and things, but tremendous corals and everything. It was just fascinating. And one of the things that amazed me was just how close to the surface this stuff is. So. And after that, went back to the catamaran. For those of the people who didn't get sick on the ride out there, who got sick on the glass bottom boat ride, we had the opportunity to take the rubber boat over to the island. And a number of everyone other than one guy, who's right there, were able to go scuba diving, snorkeling when they got there. This happens to me, I'm doing bird photography instead. But you can see, you can get a feel for the number of birds that were on the island. For humans, we were kind of constrained to this area here. There's some roped off area. So we had to stay within that area. But you can see the birds didn't pay any attention to that. But it was amazing just how close stuff was. Like this common noddy type of seabird, who was flaunting his ability to go right on the wall. I had to stay away from it. And there were dozens of sooty terns nesting. And this is kind of surprising. I thought we were late in the season, so I was surprised that there were the number of nesting birds that there were. But they just lay one egg on the sand like that, and that's the nest. Now, a couple of the other birds that we saw there, brown boobies and buster crested terns with young that they were still taking care of. So we had another significant change in the area that we were in. So tropical rainforest, the barrier reef to the outback by way of Sydney and then out to Alice Springs. So completely different climate out here. And I knew I was in the outback. We got our suitcase, walked outside, and the very first vehicle I saw was an old beat up pickup truck with an Outback Australia license plate. The big cities like Sydney are much like big cities in the United States, but when you get to the outback, it is a completely different world. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention. We have ranches here. We have cattle ranches and things here in the United States. They call their ranches stations, and some of these stations are just nuts. It's hard to imagine how big these are, but an average station in Australia is 33,000 acres, which is roughly 52 square miles. And these places are gigantic. And the largest station in Australia is called Anna Creek, and it's 9,266 square miles. That's as big as a couple of our states. So these things are huge. So as you can imagine, and what few towns are out there are very small. For instance, the population of the Northern Territory that includes Alice Springs on up to Darwin has a population of 232,000 people, and it's 515,000 square miles. So that's less than half a person per square mile. So we're talking immense areas with very few people. So when it comes to things like medical care, that's a real issue. So back in 1912, I think it was, no, I'm sorry, 1951, they started the Royal Flying Doctor Service. And they communicate by radio, or did in the beginning, and this is a flight service that covers all of the remote areas of Australia, and they have different airports where they're based. One of them happens to be the Alice Springs Airport, and they have a museum there, which, among other things, they had one of their older planes so we could see how it was set up. But if there was a medical emergency, they would fly out to these remote locations with a plane, and then occasionally with a helicopter, with a medical person, and treat the person there if possible, but if not, transport them to a hospital. So pretty amazing stuff. An offshoot of that, medicine is a real issue, but so is schooling. So as an offshoot of the Flying Doctor Service, they started the Alice Springs School of the Air. And this was an outgrowth of the medical service several years later. And they started off using the radios to broadcast to the students, much like they did with the medical team. As in more recent years, they're doing online stuff, just like our kids did during COVID. So, but just to give you a feel for this, the typical class for the school is between 100 and 140 people, or kids, during the school year. Typically, the closest student to the school is about 46 miles away, and they can be as far as 750 miles away. So kids, their classmates may be hundreds of miles away from them. And they do try to get the kids together once per school year, all together here in Alice Springs. But obviously with the distances, sometimes that's not possible. And then so they do this from 4 years old to 14. And then at 14 years old, a lot of the kids go on to boarding school. And at that point, a lot of them are seeing other children for the first time. Up to that point, a lot of them have only seen their siblings. While we were there one evening, we went out a few miles from town to an old mining site and had a fantastic steak dinner. This was our host. He talked to us about life out in the outback and things while he was fixing a dessert for us. And so he was using the same device for scooping out the ingredients and mixing them, his left hand. And so he got all that ready, put it in the pot there, and then covered it with coals, and it cooked while we were eating dinner. And that was our dessert. It was fantastic. And his wife was quite a performer, guitar and singer, and they put on a nice show. But the real show happened after that. And unfortunately, I don't have a true picture of it, but this was kind of the scenery from where we were sitting, and then they turned out all the lights. And the stars were just unbelievable. And of course, it's the Southern Hemisphere, so none of us familiar, with Southern Cross and things like that. But just a spectacular sky. The next day, we went to the Alice Springs Desert Park. Their zoos are called parks, they're animal parks. And we had an indigenous woman who was our guide for the walk. Saw a number of kangaroos. There's a red kangaroo, which is the largest of the kangaroos in Australia. I think they get to be about 6 feet tall. And then they had a fantastic bird show, one of the best I've ever seen. The barn owl, the frogmouth, and the magpie were three of the stars of the show. Now we started the road trip out to Uluru, and along the way we stopped at Stanley Chasm. This is within a national park called the West McDonald National Park, but this is actually on indigenous land. And in some ways it's very simple, but in some ways it's absolutely spectacular. You had to walk about a mile back in through some beautiful habitat, and you get to this chasm, which apparently was eroded by a river over eons. but it's 10 feet wide and about 260 feet steep cliffs on either side of it. So unlike anything I'd ever seen. There's some of the spectacular scenery that we saw on the way to Uluru. Our driver, David, was a native of Alice Springs, and it was about a 260-mile drive, so it took a few hours. And so he was constantly telling different stories, and which was pretty amazing. But this was Australia, for a large part, was a mining country, and that's what a lot of the original settlers were, and the first industry that was really developed. And he was telling us that when they first started, they brought horses in to do all the heavy lifting and everything, and found out that the horses didn't do well with the heat, so they imported camels. So they used camels for a lot of years, and they were eventually replaced by trucks. And at that point, the camel drivers were instructed to take the camels out into the wild and shoot them. And of course, they had relationships with the animals, and they refused to do it, so they just let them go. And as a result, there are now 1.5 million wild camels. They've done very well. But the amazing thing, just to give you an idea how big Australia is, David has lived his entire life in Alice Springs and has seen 2 wild camels. So they're in some pretty remote areas. Another cool thing about Australia, they have rock pigeons like we do in the cities. Like they also have some really cool pigeons, like the spinifex pigeon and the crescent pigeon. So there was always something cool to see. Finally, we made it to Uluru. And Uluru is, of course, it used to be called Ayers Rock. Unfortunately, they took it back to the Aboriginal name. But it's 1,142 feet high. It's a massive sandstone monolith. And I believe it's the largest, or one of the largest monoliths in the world. And to drive around it is almost 6 miles, so in circumference. So it is a pretty big rock. But there's a lot of things to see besides the rock. In different areas around the rock, there was vegetation to see. There was actually a waterfall, and this location is the only place where we ran into insect issues. We didn't have insects anywhere else, but here there were flies that were incredibly numerous and just a pain. But they didn't bite, so that was a good thing. They were just irritants. So we were all issued headgear, and only 2 of us didn't wear the headgear. The tour guide and this guy here who spends a lot of time in the oak openings with mosquitoes. So a bunch of flies that don't bite the heck with it. But that was a neat place to visit. On the one side of Uluru is a thing called the family cave, and the Aboriginal people have gone here for eons, and it's basically a place where the grandparents teach the grandchildren different things. So there were all these drawings on the ceiling, so that was a really neat thing that I didn't expect to see there. There's 2 things that you have to do when you're at Uluru. You have to see it at sunset, and you have to see it at sunrise. So the sunset is kind of a big event. So all the different tour companies and everything's set up, and they all have tables, and there's beer and wine and cheese and crackers and fruits and vegetables, and this stuff here, kangaroo meat. And yes, we did try it. And I don't think it tastes like chicken. I can't describe what it tastes like. This was the next morning. We got there, it was still pitch black, went to a parking lot. No big buffet of food, but we did have coffee, which was critical. And we stayed there. And so this is just as the sun's breaking the horizon and what Uluru looked like at that moment. And so I have a whole series. I have about 20 pictures and 20 pictures of Uluru, and it's really amazing the changes in color of it. And there were times where, as the sun was coming up, it actually got darker in color, which kind of surprised me. So it was a really neat experience. So I highly recommend doing both sunset and sunrise if you get there. Now, Australia is known to have 3 of the top 7 deadliest venomous snakes in the world. Fortunately, we didn't see any of them. So, but we did see this guy, a sand goanna, and, which was very impressive. It was at least 2 feet long. But it was very friendly, came out to the trail to check us out, and it's not venomous, so it was a good thing to see. Another change of habitat. Jumped on a plane, flew to Sydney. So this is near Circular Quay in downtown Sydney, the spectacular Sydney skyline. And of course there's 2 landmarks that everybody has seen on television or whatever. The first one is the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the extreme left end, there's some little things there. So take a little closer look, and you can see they're a little bigger now. And those are people. You can actually walk out on the top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Unfortunately, with our lost day due to flights, we weren't able to do that. I'm sure that we would have done it. Actually, our next door neighbor went to Australia just after we did, and she did this. So I can't imagine how high the Gulf of water is. Obviously, you're tight for it, you know. Of course, the other thing everybody has seen is the Opera House, and it is absolutely spectacular, both inside and outside. So just a couple of views is from inside looking at the other side of it. There's actually 2 sections, 2 big auditoriums, and then some smaller performance areas. It really surprised me when I got up close to it, we did. I always thought it was kind of like a poured concrete shell, but it's covered with these tiles. It's really spectacular. And like I say, it's just as spectacular inside as it is outside. We did get to go into both of the performance halls, and one of them was set up for a play, and I guess it was copyrighted stage and everything, so we weren't allowed to take any pictures. And then we went into the other one, and the symphony was practicing, so we couldn't take any pictures then, but we got to see part of their practice. So that was fun to see. After leaving the downtown area, we went out to Bondi Beach, world famous beach, and then went a little bit further and got to see the cliffs, looking out on the ocean. So spectacular way to finish up our stay in Sydney. From Sydney, we flew to Christchurch, New Zealand. And you know, you look at those on a globe, they look like they're pretty close. It's 1,200 miles. It's a lot farther than people would think. Our stay in New Zealand included flying into Christchurch. From there, we went down to Mount Cook, over to Queenstown, out to Milford Sound, back to Queenstown, and then flew up to Rotorua by way of Auckland, and then finally Auckland before heading home. So first stop in Christchurch was the Botanic Gardens, just spectacular gardens, beautiful indoor displays of different habitats. It was fantastic. They had the largest rose I've ever seen. That was a statue. A lot taller than you, Rose.
Right across the street from the Botanical Garden is the Christ Church Cathedral. This was built, it took them a long time. It was started in 1864, finished in 1904, but from 1881 up until 2011, it was damaged 6 different times by earthquakes. And most of the damage went to the spire and tower each time, so they had to keep rebuilding it. And finally, after the 2011 quake, which was pretty severe, they gave up and just tore it down. So this is what the church looks, or cathedral looks like now. And in driving around the downtown, we saw several small parking lots like this. And our tour director told us that basically anytime you saw a small parking lot like that, there had been a building there that got destroyed in the 2011 quake. And they just tore them down and put in a small parking lot. But there were several of them. It was quite a destructive earthquake, and as I recall, there were something on the order of 185 people killed in it. But one thing that's really neat about Christ Church downtown, there's a lot of big murals like this on the side of the buildings, which was really cool. We hit the road from Christ Church, heading south to Mount Cook, and it's very flat, a lot of vegetation, a lot of farmland, and there's a lot of ranches there, a lot of cattle, and lots of sheep. They're well known for their sheep. And the sheep herd currently is around 26 million in New Zealand. And believe it or not, that's down from, in 1980, it was about 80 million. So it's a much smaller herd now than it used to be. And so we got to go to one sheep ranch and got to watch a sheepdog demonstration, which was really impressive. And drove by a number of cattle ranches. One thing that was new to me, it was a surprise, they also ranch deer. They have they're free roaming deer, but they are on farms and are harvested for their meat. And there's approximately 833,000 deer raised on farms in New Zealand. So that was a surprise to me. This was our first view of Mount Cook, and it's the tallest mountain in New Zealand, and you'll say just spectacular. We stayed at the Hermitage Hotel that's in Mount Cook National Park. It's a spectacular place, and this was the view from our hotel room. Not bad. Next morning after we got there, we decided to take a trail, and it said it was only like an hour and a half walk or something. And this was one of the flatter sections. And there were very steep steps, and it was a rugged walk. The little guy on the right there, the New Zealand fantail, was a cool little bird, and it followed us for quite a distance, and at times was probably within 2 feet of us. There were times where it was too close, I couldn't focus on it. That afternoon, this was our longest walking day. We did that walk in the morning because we knew we were going to do this boat ride in the afternoon, figured out how much walking can that be. Well, it turned out we had to walk quite a ways to get to where the boats were. So I think we ended up walking almost 8 miles that day. But well, this is through old glaciated area, and there was a lot of glacial till and everything. And then we got out to Tasman Lake, which is where we picked up the boats, and went down Tasman Lake to the end of Tasman Glacier, and that's Mount Cook in the background. But like glaciers in other parts of the world, the glaciers in New Zealand are severely impacted by global climate change. And let me see, Tasman Lake didn't exist in 1973, and now it's 4 miles long. So since 1973, the Tasman glacier has retreated 4 miles. So this is the end of it. One thing that was in, of course, this is all till that it picks up dirt along the way. And we normally see glaciers looking like this, the white ice. You see this blue ice. And during that day, that's where calving has just recently happened, where a chunk of ice broke off, and the ice that's freshly exposed to air is this real deep blue, pretty blue color. So, just so happened that one of the icebergs that was close to the dock, while we were looking at the glacier, by the time we came back, had rolled over. And so it was that spectacular blue. That's one of the boats in our fleet. And we picked up an ice cube during the trip. But again, here's some of the blue ice that's been freshly exposed to the air. Another of the cool birds we saw, this is one of the endemic species in New Zealand, and it's only found there, and paradise shell duck. It was interesting for another standpoint. It was, this is the female. So this is one of the few species where the female is actually more colorful than the male. And they were everywhere. There were pairs in all the fields, everywhere we drove. There's a food market that we stopped at out in the country. It had lots of fruits and vegetables and things, and lots of flowers, beautiful gardens. But the main thing that they were pushing while they were there is Manuka honey. And Manuka honey is really expensive. But it's expensive because it's only produced in very limited areas in New Zealand and Australia. And the bees have to visit Manuka bush, which only blooms for like 4 to 6 weeks a year. So it's very limited area, very limited time that they can nectar on the flowers. And but Manuka honey has a lot of medical properties. It's antioxidant, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory. So a lot of doctors recommend its use, and so it's good for treating wounds and burns. It's pretty amazing stuff. So look for Manuka honey, but expect to pay some money for it. Next, we took a bus trip down to Fiordland National Park in Milford Sound. Interesting day, because when we left the hotel, it was overcast, raining, just kind of a miserable day. And then we drove through this really long tunnel and to get to the Sound, and it was like this on the other side of the tunnel. Just amazing. So the mountains were high enough that it really affected the weather. And it was like this the whole time we were at the Sound. This was our boat that we took out to right at the edge of the ocean. And the Sound is formed by glaciers. It's about 10 miles long and real steep cliffs all along both sides and these spectacular waterfalls. Let's see. There were just dozens of these as we went along. And of course there were a lot of birds. Didn't get any good pictures of them, but a lot of birds. We did see a family of fur seals, including a little pup here. Getting back to Queenstown, just a short walk from our hotel was this wonderful gardens. And we had lots of plantings, lots of really neat fountains, and lots of cool statues like that, and a big tree. Yeah, so giant sequoia. And it's interesting, they got planting different things from different places around the world because the soil is so rich and the climate and everything, they grow really fast. And so it was astounding how big this tree was for the age. And there was, right next to that was an inlet for lake and some more spectacular birds, black swans, black-billed gull, which is another endemic species only found in New Zealand, and notably the Australian coot, which looks an awful lot like American coots, which of course we know as mudhens. So that's the mudhen's Australian cousin. So I mentioned this was an inlet, there was a lake there, and we were able to take a ride on the lake on the Earnslaw, TSS Earnslaw. I could think of, like HMS, Her Majesty's ship. I could not figure out what TSS stood for. So I had to go online and do a little research. And it's not really, it's something like twin screw schooner. How exciting is that? But anyway, it was the TSS Earnslaw, which was built in 1912. So we were getting ready to load up, but before we could load up, they had to load up the coal. It's a coal-fired ship. And so we took a ride. Needless to say, the scenery was incredible. We took about, went down to the end of Wakutipu Lake, and at the end we came to a Walter Peak Country Farm. And, so this was an active farm for generations, and they made it into more of a tourist thing. They had the most incredible buffet lunch I've ever had in my life, and then a lot of demonstrations and things about farming and sheep shearing demonstration and things like that. From there we were heading via New Zealand Air from the South Island to the North Island. So we went by way of Auckland to Rotorua. And our first stop in Rotorua was to see the national kiwi hatchery. Of course, kiwi is their national bird, and they are endangered. I always thought there was one kind of kiwi. Found out that day there are 5, but they're all endangered. And their threats are all these different mammals, 3 of them natural. Stoats are related to weasels, just a different size. And so 3 of them are wild animals, but cats and dogs take a tremendous toll on kiwis also. But they get eggs from different parts of the country, take them to the institute here and hatch them and foster them out into the wild. These 2 are not live, they're stuffed, but we were able to see one young bird. They brought it out. We were not allowed to take pictures of it. But very cool birds. One thing that's unique about them is I always thought their nostrils were up here. Their nostrils are down here. And one thing I mentioned too, I was surprised. My particular interest in the birding world are birds of prey, so hawks, owls, and eagles. And I was kind of surprised that there weren't any of those listed on the threats to kiwis. But it turns out there are only 4 kinds of birds of prey in all of New Zealand. There's falcon, there's a harrier, and 2 kinds of owls. And none of those have kiwi as a primary food item. And like 4 species of raptors in the entire country is pretty amazing, particularly when you put it in context. Here in Wildwood Park, we know of at least 5 nesting species of birds of prey. So just here in this park, we have more than the entire country of New Zealand. Pretty amazing. Of course, Paul and I on many trips have said, we gotta do a zip line. And we never had the opportunity to do it. So this was the trip. So we went to the Rotorua Canopy Tour, and here we are all geared up, ready to go. And we start off walking through the forest. And this was one of the zip lines. This kind of made me nervous because you'd see the line and then it kind of disappears. Where the heck are we going now? But we had two great tour guides. They were fantastic. And here's Paula on one of the zips. And needless to say, most of the time we were like 60 feet off the ground. And Paula got very comfortable at that height. I was impressed. I didn't do that. After we left there, we went on a bus ride and stopped at Otorohanga. There's our train station, but there was a tremendous coffee shop in there. We stopped in there for coffee, and of course, particularly older guys like me, when you have coffee, causes something else. So fortunately there was this really convenient restroom right across the street. And so I thought it was really cool because they had all the different names that you could possibly call. And of course the ladies' side of things like powder room, where this is outhouse. So it's different terminology. And some of those are kind of... Our son knew a couple of Australians when he was in college, and they always referred to bog. So that was, but this wasn't at the same location, but we did come across one restroom that provided information to make sure you were doing it correctly. Certain ways you're not supposed to use the toilet. Thank goodness Our next stop were the Lauer caves. This was the entrance to the caves. After you went inside, you came upon this, which is a spiral ramp. So we had to go round and around as we went down to the bottom. We got to the entrance of the indoor entrance to the cave. And this was absolutely spectacular. And of course, like a lot of caves, it had all the cave features, stalactites, stalagmites, and everything. Just absolutely beautiful. But what we were really looking for was when you saw this. And the stuff that you see hanging down here is silk. That's produced by a larva for a fungus gnat. And that may not mean much, but wherever you see these things, when there's no light, it looks like this. These are the famous glowworms of Lauer. So they did a bioluminescence. So pretty spectacular. Next stop was the Maumee Institute. One thing, I won't take time to get into it, but there was a significant difference in the way Australia and New Zealand treated their indigenous populations. In New Zealand, they revere the Maumee, and everywhere you go, you got on an airplane, and they'll give you a greeting in English and one in Maori. And different places that you went, they recognized the fact that they were on what had been in Maori land. So very respectful, and it's brought to your attention all the time. They have quite a culture, they have quite a language. And the woman who took us around their grounds spent a few minutes teaching us how to say this. This is one word. I'm not even going to attempt that now. 5 minutes after we were done, I couldn't say it. One of the cool things, this is very much a geological area. It's kind of like a mini Yellowstone, with the exception of the fact that it's in the middle of town. It's not out in the wilds someplace like Yellowstone is. But there were the hot mud pits and everything. It's all right in the middle of town. And one of the great things about this is that they're working with youth and teaching them the Maori trades, the different skills, different crafts that they developed over the centuries. And so the gentleman there is doing some stone carving, see wood carving, and a lot of other crafts. So that was wonderful to see. We also saw, whoops, they welcomed us. They had a lodge there on the grounds, and they're kind of a protected people of their lodges, and they had to check you out to make sure whether you're friend or foe. And they do this by coming out and being really intimidating. And their eyes bulge, and they stick out their tongues and make loud grunts and things. Very, very scary. But then when they determine that you're a friend, not a foe, then you're welcomed in, and they're wonderful people. They performed a number of dances for us. Oh, okay. Uh-oh. No, because it's not going to work. Sorry. Well, leaving Rotorua, we came to Auckland. Both islands are formed through volcano. So there's actually, within the Auckland city limits, 53 volcanoes. There's 2 of them here. We're all inactive. I think the most recent volcanic eruption was about 600 years ago. But there's these hills like this all over the city, and they're all ancient volcanoes. We went to the War Museum, which is kind of misnamed. One floor of it is related to the wars that New Zealand's been involved with. They have a long list of people who have been killed in wars and different displays and everything, which is spectacular. But they also have natural history and a section dedicated to the Maumee, and so just very cool displays. This one was right near here. There was a room that you could walk into, and every few minutes it would show you what it was like to be in that room during an earthquake, and the whole thing shook like crazy. So I'd never experienced that before in a museum, so that was pretty cool. Well, a couple of shots of the downtown area in Auckland, and let's see, I think this is bear with me for a moment. That is the Sky Tower. It's 1,076 feet tall, and I guess for a period of time it was the tallest building in the southern hemisphere. It was built in 1977. And one of the great things about it is up here is a restaurant, which for our final dinner of the tour, we got to have dinner. This was the view from the restaurant. So, in conclusion, just wanted to thank you all for being here. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. We do our trips, our international trips with a company called Odysseys Unlimited. They do a fabulous job. We've been very happy with them. Have a number of their catalogs here if anybody's interested. I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
So Steve, what time of year did you go?
March, last March.
So they're fall.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's why it was kind of surprising to me that there were still birds on that. Seemed right in the season. Yes, Rose.
Did you get to walk through the rainforest in the very first part of the trip? You said something changed, but did you get to walk in there?
A little bit, not a tremendous amount of walking in the rainforest. Not as much as we probably would have. But I thought it was a fair treat. What we got to do is
Yes.
Do they harvest the silk that is luminous at dark in those caves?
No, that actually is a good question, thank you. The silk is the larva form that, it hangs down, and that's how they catch their food. So when an insect or something hits the silk, then they'll eat that silk, bring it up, and then eat the insect that got stuck on it.
Oh, wonderful, thank you.
Yes, Steve?
Did you camp at the rock? Did you camp?
Oh, no. We don't camp with out of season.
You were there at the sunrise and sunset?
Yeah, we got up really early and bust out there.
Okay.
Yeah, our hotel was very close.
Oh, very close.
Yeah, with out of season limited, there's no camp.